Welcome to the Everything Publishing Conversation Hour, hopefully maybe half an hour. Uh, I'm Melanie Callahan with Self Publishing Services, and I am joined today by Kendall, who is also with Self Publishing Services. She is an expert in lots of things, traditional publishing, editing, marketing. She's a person with many talents. And today we are going to talk a bit about kind of the levels of editing and specifically beta reads versus um, oh gosh, substantive edits or sensitivity reads. That's what it is. Um,
Yeah,
and why you need them and how to find them and what it means for you. Yeah, it's definitely been a big topic of conversation, the sensitivity reads lately.
yeah,
Kendall, I'm sure you've seen some news that goes around about people who opt not to do sensitivity reads.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of a newer piece of the editing process. It's always been something that has been there, but calling it a sensitivity read is kind of a new thing. I think that can freak some people out.
Right.
But it's not scary.
No,
Promise.
not at all. And it's not as I think it can be politicized as well. And I think that the idea is that it doesn't have to be politicized. You're literally just trying to ensure that your readers have a good experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the word sensitivity being in there makes people think that somehow you're pandering or watering down your manuscript, when in actuality, getting a sensitivity reader is simply making sure that you're not going to alienate your target reader.
Right.
There's been plenty of times where I've read a book and I've thought I would sure love to suggest a sensitivity read for this particular individual or group that you're talking about in your book. And I always do, but knowing full well, the people that you're writing to are not going to care about the words that you're using here.
Right.
Um, so anyway, it's
Right. Yeah, it's definitely something to do with your target audience in mind. And
yeah,
I think very, very few authors go into writing a book with the goal of being offensive.
right.
Um, and so it's more that, you don't know what you don't know. And
Exactly. Exactly.
sometimes if your book is going to be in front of people who might have more knowledge about something, it's probably a good idea to embrace that and get their take on things. But
Right.
um and that's different than a beta read, right? So
Yes.
there it's hard with editing. There's so many different levels of editing. We at Self-Publishing Services, we talk about how we do them all, and substantive editing is different than line editing, is different than copy editing, is different than proofreading.
Yeah.
And beta read is kind of a unique, I would say, from my standpoint, that a beta read is one of those places where, although we always say if you pay for nothing else, pay for an editor and a cover designer,
Yeah.
a beta read is something that you could possibly ask a friend to do, but there are conditions to that. So,
Absolutely.
what do you think, Kendall? What are your, first of all, how would you define a beta read?
So I define a beta read. I've also heard it sometimes called an editorial assessment. Some people, that's one of the things that drives me crazy about publishing is different companies sometimes have different words for the exact same thing. Um,
Yes. Or they define the same word differently across the board.
right. It's a lot. So yeah, I've heard it sometimes called editorial assessment, editorial review, editorial diagnosis, all those different things. And essentially it is when someone is reading a manuscript, and depending on the levels that you and that person are going to get into, they're going to tell you strengths, weaknesses, of your manuscript. They're going to tell you places where maybe they got caught up, where they found a roadblock, maybe places if they felt inclined to put it down and not pick it back up, things that just pulled them out of the read. It's essentially a 30,000 foot view of your manuscript.
Yeah.
So It's not going to be a thing where you're going to get all of these like inline edits, really intricate, like, oh, this was awkward phrasing, let me rewrite it for you. It's going
Right.
to be like your dialogue felt really awkward.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
then,
Or I thought your main character was a real jerk.
right. Or I don't understand how we got to this point in your manuscript. Like
Yeah.
there seems to be a giant plot hole and I don't get it. Um, so depending on what you and the person that you've hired to be your beta reader have agreed upon, sometimes, and I'm saying this as someone who has given professional beta reads, sometimes with authors, I just kind of give them a memo and I'm just like, this is basically what I'm feeling with your manuscript. Here's what's bad, here's what's good, here, keep this in mind. And then other times you might be able to like get more extensive notes, maybe hop on a call with them to really talk things through. But that just kind of depends on you and the person that you're hiring. But
Yeah. So that makes me think, if somebody asks, where do you do a beta read in your process? So ideally, what have you as the author already done? At what point is it good to turn your manuscript over to somebody for a beta read?
I would say once you have a completed draft, you've done some self-editing. I think when you have the manuscript in a place where it is as good as you can get it, we've said sometimes when we've talked, like when you don't want to look at it anymore, when
Mm-hmm.
it's
Yeah,
you
when you're
just,
sick of it.
yeah, when your words are just the worst and you're like, well, I can't write anymore, that's the time to bring in someone else to do a beta read. um,
And
would you
then,
agree?
yeah, I totally agree, because I think that the idea is you have gotten this book to a point where you feel good about how it flows and how the plot lays out and who the characters are and what their arcs are. Um, but you know that there's still work to be done. You just can't quite identify what that work might need to be.
Yeah.
And so then you bring in somebody who, and this is where I say, I think we say that an editor, like a professional editor, is going to be great for a beta read, especially
Yeah.
somebody who's really plugged into the publishing industry.
Yeah.
Because what you're looking for, I think, with a beta read is somebody who kind of personifies or at least really understands your target audience
Yeah.
and can read it with an eye of, here is what your reader is going to key in on. Here is what they will appreciate. Here is what they will not appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
Because probably, and this is not true for everybody who's writing a book, probably your goal is to sell books.
Right.
And so you want to put something out there that's going to resonate with your target audience.
Yeah.
So it kind of, so if you go the editor route, you can pay somebody to do that. And that's going to be really great, valuable advice, assuming you vet that editor and they have great credentials and are really working with the intent of making your book marketable.
Yeah.
Um, the other way you can go is, and I say friend, but it does not, like, you almost are better off not having a friend do this.
Yeah.
If you know someone who is an avid reader of your particular genre or subcategory, ask them if they are
Yeah.
willing to read your book, just and give you that feedback. And you can provide, I would recommend that you provide for them specifics. Here's the
Yes.
kind of feedback I'm looking for. Here's what I want you to pay attention to. And actually, that's maybe something we'll create, is beta read instructions, and you can
Yeah.
find them at our website. Something that you can hand over to a potential beta reader. And there's
Yeah.
lots of avenues for finding those people. Probably if you go out on social media and do some searching. But again, you want to be careful about who you're asking to beta read.
Yes.
Because and if you're doing it that way, get more than one.
Yes. Absolutely. I know it feels so. I can feel the frustration when people are like, "Can I just have my friend read it?" Like they'll be honest with me, and it's not that we're trying to get you to just spend all of your money.
No,
um,
no, No.
But when you just get a friend to read it and just say, hey, what do you think of this?
Hmm.
You're gonna, even if you have a friend who you're like, no, they are not afraid to be real with me. Um, there's always going to be that, they love you, they're your friend, they are gonna, they're not gonna be like, wow, this is yikes, there's a lot going on, like they're going to really struggle to give you that. They're going to, unless you can give them some really clear guidelines of like, okay, you're my friend, but like, here's what I need you to say, just giving it to a friend and just be like, anything you think, that
Yeah.
that's so broad, and that emotional connection is harder than you think.
And there can be value in what they say for sure. But the other
Absolutely.
issue could be that, like, oh, that friend really only ever reads historical fiction, and
Right.
you have written a cozy mystery. Um,
Exactly.
so what they're looking for out of their books is going to be a lot different than a cozy mystery reader is looking for out of their books. So
Absolutely.
it's that part where you want to find somebody who really represents your
Yes.
actual target audience.
Yeah.
And I do think that there are probably people out there who are willing to do the beta read for minimal compensation or no compensation. Like they may
Mhm.
just be interested in learning the process or helping out an author or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that too.
Yeah.
Or you might be able to say, hey, in exchange for a plate of cookies, would you read my book?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but definitely like and I do say though, if you're paying an editor to do it, one beta reader is sufficient because that's what they do and they
Yeah.
they know how to do it. If you are
Yeah.
going the route of, hey, I've curated some folks on Instagram or wherever who have shown an interest,
Yeah.
then the like get 4 or 5 opinions
Yeah.
and see what are the consistencies between these
Right.
beta readers. What are they all saying? What are, and
Yeah.
ultimately, as the author, it's still your call.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're getting an editor, the reason that it's you're getting the opinion of basically somebody who's keyed into the marketplace and is keyed into your genre from a business sense as opposed to a reader sense. So they can come
Right.
to you with like, this is what's selling in your space. This is what's struggling. This is what, and that's great, and that's why one beta read from a professional is gonna get you where you need to go. Whereas if you're asking just readers in your space, as with any demographic, if you're asking one person their opinion, you're asking one person their opinion.
Yeah.
So the more you can scattershot that to get a broader scope of what your actual readers think and what bothers them and what gets them excited, um, that's why we say get more for just a general, like a reader's beta read.
Yep. Yeah. They will end up being different.
Yeah,
The type of feedback you get from an editor versus a reader, both valuable in their own way.
for sure.
Um, so then once you have that, so let's say you put it out there, you found a small handful of readers to read your book, give you feedback. You had a really great instruction manual for them provided by self-publishing services. What do you do then? What's your next step?
A lot of it depends on the feedback that you get. It and I mean, to be completely like transparent, it depends on what your budget is for the next step.
Yeah. Yep.
If you've got the money to pay for an editor to do a full editorial markup, then that's one thing. If you're trying to like cut your costs as best you can, then after a beta read, it's usually good to go back to the manuscript and see what you can do from there. If there's feedback that you've gotten that you're like, oh, sure, I see that hole, let's
Hmm.
work to fill that. um and a lot of times in the beta read, that is one of your first clues that you might need to hire a sensitivity reader. um
Yeah.
my general rule of thumb when I talk about a sensitivity read is just like a beta read. I would say doing that prior to the editorial process, like, proofreading and developmental edits and line edits, if you can do it before then, I think that's best.
Yeah.
Because essentially what a sensitivity reader is, just I realize we've not like defined it.
Defined it. Yeah.
So it's basically a reader from a demographic to which you do not belong, but you are writing about in your book. For instance, I have a friend who wrote a book and she featured Hawaiian indigenous Hawaiians pretty prominently.
Hmm.
And she is not indigenous Hawaiian. I think the official word is Kanaka, but I don't quote me on that.
Right.
I also am not indigenous Hawaiian. If you couldn't tell by the way that I butchered that word, I'm so sorry. But she, having that culture and that people featured in her book was important to her story, but she wanted to do that respectfully and she wanted to do that correctly.
Hmm.
So she had a Hawaiian person read her book to give her notes on like, oh, we would call this that, or just simple things like that, all the way to like, that's offensive, or and it just ran the gambit. And that's the thing of a sensitive reader. It's not just being like, oh, that's offensive.
Right.
It's also making sure that you're just representing that group correctly.
And
Um,
and I would say even holistically, because
yeah.
I think one of the icks that people might get around sensitivity reader is, oh, you want me to have a sensitivity reader so that I can make sure that this demographic that I'm representing is represented in a way that makes them the hero or makes them
Mhm.
perfect or whatever. And I think that I would argue that if you look at any of the feedback about narratives involving demographics that are underrepresented, is they're like, we are very tired of falling into either the mystic camp, the mystic exotic camp where we're perfect or whatever, or the, very offensive camp. Like, you
Sure.
ultimately what you're going for is you want a whole real character that and because you don't necessarily come from that demographic, you don't know how what's a realistic way necessarily to approach the nuance to that character. You want
Sure.
them to be nuanced, you want your characters to be flawed in a realistic way.
Mhm.
um and so if you think about it, it's, to me, it's kind of on par with, if you're going to write about a doctor or a lawyer or a nail tech or a whatever, and you don't do any research about that actual job, and you just put
Right.
in there what you think they do, you're going
Right.
to get a lot of feedback from readers who are like, hey, so I do that for a living and you are way off base here.
Right.
Um, so sensitivity reader is the same thing except for a demographic of people as opposed to a profession.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, and because the notes that you will get are going to be, I mean, there might just be some little corrections like, oh, that's called this, not that, or
Yeah.
whatever. But a lot of the like the more substantial notes are going to be about like how you are representing a people, or how you are featuring an important cultural moment or something like that. Um, those are hardier. Those can be hardier rewrites, so it's usually good to do that before you start worrying about like spelling and you know
Word
um
choice. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, for sure. And it's interesting. I feel like the sensitivity read is relatively new in the industry. And so it might take a little bit more research than, like, I think generally speaking, it's probably pretty easy to find a beta reader, right? People are
Yeah.
pretty familiar with that concept. A sensitivity reader, it may require a little more homework to find somebody, especially if you're doing something that's pretty niche, something that the demographic is not large or not cohesive or,
Mhm.
um, do you have any thoughts on how to find those people or when and where to look for them?
So I the internet, of course. um it was a lot easier when like Twitter was actually usable.
Free X days.
Oh, yeah. Because you'd have, and I mean, there's starting to be these other communities that are popping up. Book Talk, Bookstagram, those are really powerful communities. And I think maybe I'm just showing my age by being like, oh, remember when Twitter back in my day? Um, but those are the people that provide those sensitivity reads know that they have a niche skill that not everyone can do. So you will find that service that they provide featured prominently on their socials. So just exploring those communities like Book Talk, Bookstagram, Facebook writing groups, even if that individual sensitivity reader can't, if you're writing about Hawaii and you find somebody who like does other types of sensitivity reads, typically they can get you plugged into the community of other professions and maybe find you a person. So exploring those communities on social media is certainly a really great way. If you have some kind of a social media platform with enough followers that are engaging with your content enough, just putting out the call of like, hey, I'm looking for this person.
Yeah.
You know, LinkedIn is like sterile and corporate
It's
as LinkedIn.
such a weird space.
It is, but that's another great place to say like, hey, I'm looking for a sensitivity reader from this community.
Right.
Even if that particular reader that you're looking for maybe doesn't see it, someone who knows them will. So
And
that's a great way to start
that's
anyway.
that's good to know because I'm like, huh. Because I think what you run into there too is like some of those groups can be so small or can be so
Uh-huh.
separate that it is like it's work to track down those people.
Yeah.
I keep saying those people. I feel like that is probably offensive too, but um
Whatever group you're trying to represent.
whatever group. And it gets kind of strange to talk about this because it does feel like there's so much weight or baggage associated with it. One thing I would say too is that just like any other reader don't or any other editor, don't be afraid to it has to be a mutually beneficial relationship. So
Yes,
you can ask for perhaps maybe not a sample edit, but definitely interview that person and make sure it's a good fit for you and your
for
writing
sure.
style as well. Even though you may have fewer options to choose from, you still that you are still allowed to pick someone whose style is going to work with yours
Right. Yeah.
and make it flow well in your process. But
Yeah.
and I would just say, don't be afraid to. This is where it gets interesting and where I could have very long philosophical conversations about is there a slippery slope about, because it like, okay, you really feel like there's this piece, a demographic or something that is an integral part of your plot that you really want to focus on. You are not of that demographic. And there may be voices out there saying that you shouldn't write about it if you're not of that group. Um, and where does the line go there and how, I do think that's a topic for a different day and a different medium. But just to say that it is an interesting and potentially sensitive topic to think about. But when it's all said and done, it's a business decision that you are making. You do not want your final product to be something that hits that wrong note. And you wouldn't want it to be that way if you were writing about a specific career type and got it wrong too. So if you think about it in those terms, it can maybe take some of that weight off of it.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, with any editorial relationship, whether it's a beta reader or a sensitivity reader or just a traditional editor, it is hard to get edits back. It is
Mm-hmm.
hard to hear that something you've done in your book doesn't quite work.
Right.
And I feel like that can be magnified a lot if you get the feedback of like, not only does this not work, but what you're saying is also hurtful or
Yeah.
harmful. It's like, wow, so like I suck twice. Um, So I would just encourage anyone who's doing that. I mean, I say this with anyone who's about to work with an editor, like edits, notes, revision, all that kind of stuff is not a personal attack.
No.
It is your editor trying to come alongside you and help you find a solution. And all your editor wants to do is make your book the best it can be.
Right.
Of course, there are going to be some editors that like their edits are like an ego trip and it's going to be a bunch of clashing and butting heads. But a good editor is not that.
Right.
A good editor wants to come alongside you and collaborate and just empower you to make informed decisions to make your book the best. And it's the same thing with a sensitivity reader.
Right.
I would really encourage authors that are hiring sensitivity readers to kind of put their own their need for comfort to the side for a second and let this, because you're hiring them to tell you if something is amiss, if something doesn't work. And so if you need that to be relayed to you in a way that is very gentle and very, like, okay, I know you didn't mean to say this, but, maybe you're not quite at the place to not only write this book, but to write about this particular demographic that you're trying to highlight.
Yeah.
And, so obviously like if you're working with somebody that's like you're terrible, that's not a great editorial partner. That's not a
Right.
in any
Yeah.
capacity regardless of what they're doing for you.
Right.
But just remember that like if they're giving you notes, even if they say something that is like a little hard to digest, like put your this sounds so like I don't know, trite and just silly, but like put your feelings to the side for a second and
Yeah.
listen to the words that are being told to you. That person is giving you a gift by saying like,
Yes.
hey, this is hurtful, this is harmful, this is just wrong, whatever the note might be. I know obviously I'm a woman, I am a Jewish person, so I have worked with clients who have represented those two demographics that I am a part of. And even though they maybe didn't hire me to be like, hey, did you know, oops, I always am quick to call out those things. And what is always great is when that author hears me say that and I'm like, hey, I know you didn't mean to say this, but hey, this
Yeah.
was, I don't know, bad in some
This
way. This is
this is
hurtful.
yeah, you may want to rethink that phrasing.
Yeah. Um, and I mean, like, especially like, not to like get into a whole thing, but like, especially as like a as a Jewish person and as a woman, there are some things that like are just so part of the common vernacular that if you're not a part of those groups, you might not realize you're saying something that is really hurtful,
Right.
like,
Right.
oh, did you know that that's actually tied to this that has hurt, these people that you're trying to like lift up in your story. So know that they are really trying to help you do better and help you see something that you have a blind spot for, because we all have blind spots.
Oh, for sure.
Um,
I will
and
say, sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead.
I just was going to say, as a very run-of-the-mill white bread person from Montana, where we have, I believe, our homogenous white people population is like 93% or something like that. There is not much in the way of diversity. There's Native
Sure.
Americans are the largest group of diverse individuals in Montana. There is so much. I mean, so there's two
Yeah.
sides to that, right? Like I literally have no idea what some of the stereotypes are that are out there. And so it would be
Sure.
so easy for me to get that wrong if I tried to, you know, talk about any other group that I have zero
Right.
um my
Because why
only
would you know that?
right, like my exposure to that on is on TV, right? Or
Uh-huh.
media, in the media.
Uh-huh.
That's it. That's all I know.
Yeah.
And I just don't, I did work with a gal who was also Jewish, and she's like, it's so funny. She was from New York, and she's like, it's really weird to be here because I am the most exotic thing around. And I was like, oh, that's kind of sad. But
Yeah.
you know, And then I would say too, like if you are going, there's the added benefit of getting a sensitivity read is like if you're going as far as to recognize that you want to represent this group well, you're doing a service to your readers, like me,
Absolutely.
whose
Absolutely.
exposure has been so narrow in scope that I really don't know how to, or when even to be like, oh, that might be an issue.
Right.
Um, so you're
Right.
doing the world a favor by
Yeah.
getting it right.
Yeah. And, when it comes to bringing these other groups, whether it is a race or a gender or a sexual orientation or a nationality, whatever the group is that you're featuring that you do not belong to, um, I would just gently say that if you are like, I don't need a sensitivity reader, I can do this, I'm fine. I would gently suggest like really look into yourself and decide why you are featuring that group in your story if you
Mhm.
don't want to make sure that you're doing it right. What are the
Right.
motivations to putting that particular demographic into your book? Um,
Right. What is the purpose that that group is serving in your book?
right. Why
What
have you
part of
decided
the
to feature it that way?
yeah.
Why have you
Yeah.
decided to put them in there? And why are you now worried about having someone come and give their feedback on it? Um,
Yes.
and every author, every book is going to be different and you're gonna have to make your own decisions. But this is just my encouragement that like it's not something that's meant to like cut your writing off at the knees. It's meant to make it stronger and make you do a better job of portraying people in your book.
Yeah, and I think that's where for me the philosophical argument goes, right? Like you have to weigh out the merit of empathetically exploring demographics or cultures or whatever that are not your own,
Mhm.
um, versus the impact of doing that in a wrong way or in a
Right.
in a harmful way. I
Right.
shouldn't say, yeah. And
Yeah.
I think I think this is where all of those slippery slope arguments come into play. I do
Yeah.
think there is so much value in me as a very vanilla white woman from Montana putting myself into the shoes of somebody else
Sure.
and exploring through fiction what that life would be like. There's so much value to that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. Just that it should be done well and respectfully.
Yeah. And I also think bringing the community that you are featuring along the journey with you is important. I
Yeah.
Not to like be super shady, but there's a certain sparkly vampire series that features a real Native American the Quileute people, and um, she famously did not confer with the Quileutes at all for her book,
Uh,
and they are Jacob, who is like, the I'm talking about Twilight if you weren't aware. Um, but
Bringing you up to speed.
yeah, I realize not everyone is a millennial girl like me. um, but Jacob, who is the part of the like Bella Edward Jacob love triangle, the main thing in that book is a Quileute young man. So like the tribe features heavily in this book, and she sourced her own lore, and she didn't reach out to the Quileute people. She didn't, after the fact, didn't bring them in to, give them any like royalties or anything, like,
Yikes.
yeah, the Quileutes are like, they try to raise money for like schools because, like any Native American reservation, poverty is a real problem.
Yeah.
And it would be such a boon if Stephanie Meyer had taken the time to be like, hey, let's partner. And she didn't.
Yes.
And she fell into a lot of harmful tropes about Indigenous men, like, for instance, featuring them as these creatures that turn into big beasts when they get angry.
Oh dear.
Oh, not great, and had she talked to an Indigenous person, had she talked to a Quileute person, they could have made sure. I don't even know if werewolves or shapeshifters are a part of Quileute lore. So that could be like a completely different tribe as well. So like they could
Right.
have helped her make sure she got her lore right, and to avoid those harmful stereotypes, to make because I mean, an indigenous person in such a huge mainstream piece of fiction and then movies, that could have been huge. And
Yeah.
she's done it the right way. And that could have been such a big boon to the Quileute people had they been able to be brought along on this journey. And that didn't happen. Um,
Yeah. Imagine how far, like imagine the benefit that that could have been.
yeah.
Um, and that's sad. I mean, and and I will say that in Montana, that is like if I were going to write a piece of fiction that incorporated a Native American character, because that is our largest minority here,
Mhm.
I would not even attempt without reaching out to somebody because there's so much diversity in the tribes. There's so much, and we were even talking about this internally the other day, because there has been a bit of a pushback on the Killers of the Flower Moon and
Mhm.
how, you know, once again, there's a white person telling a Native American story,
Mhm.
which that gets into all kinds of deeper philosophical arguments. Um, but I think it drives home the point that your intentions are good and do the right thing. It will go so far,
Yeah.
not only with your readers, which is important, but also like in the world at large to
Right.
make things better. I mean,
Right.
there,
Yeah.
yeah, give voice to people who just don't have as much opportunity to have a voice and give you an opportunity to explore empathetically,
Mhm.
um, from somebody else's standpoint.
Yeah. The more that you can make sure that you are telling a story and representing a community well, I mean, everyone benefits from it. It makes your writing stronger. Uh it increases empathy, and just a broader worldview for your readers. And it can really help lift that community up depending on what happens with the book and how the readership goes. um so yeah, I think it can feel scary to do a sensitivity read, and it can feel like someone is trying to stop you from having fun and just writing carefree. But I think the reality, like, it ultimately for me comes down to the fact that actions have consequences, and you might not realize, even though you don't intend to and you're just doing your best, you could be harming someone that you don't mean to harm, or that you like actively don't want to harm. um and especially if you're trying to feature a group of people in a positive light that you're trying to like lift up, if in doing so you're actually harming them, the impact is going to exceed the intent of your actions. And
Yeah.
um a sensitivity reader can help stop that, and can help lift up your writing and lift up the community that you're wanting to feature.
Yeah.
So
I really feel like it should be seen as on par with being a fact checker and
yeah.
I think I've mentioned before that Reddit is my jam and I really, that I have given up most all social media and that's the only one I hang out on anymore.
Yeah.
And there's frequently people who will be like, what kind of books do you not read because they feature something that you know a lot about and they
Gosh.
get it wrong all the time? And I'm
Right.
like, yeah, man, if you're going to talk about cowboys and ranches, I'm not going to read it unless you actually know it, unless you came from there and actually know what you're talking about. I can't because it will drive me insane to read these
Yeah.
inaccuracies.
Yeah. Yeah. The TV show Younger with Hilary Duff and Sutton Foster. I it For those who have not seen this piece of just masterpiece television, it was about Sutton Foster trying to get back into the workforce in her like 40s.
Oh,
But because Sutton has a young face, I mean, Sutton does look young for her age, but they were trying to posit that she was like 20. And I was like,
not.
But anyway, if you suspend that piece of disbelief, it was about the publishing industry. So she's trying to
Oh,
get into the publishing world. And I was actively working for Penguin Random House at the time. And like there was one episode that like they had a Summer Friday episode, which a lot of industries do Summer Fridays, but in publishing it's like a thing. And it's like
what
the
is a summer
best.
Friday? Is that like it's summer and Friday you get to take the day off?
You get a half day.
Ooh.
Sometimes you can jimmy your schedule and work longer Monday through Thursday and then just take off Fridays.
Oh,
But and
a
it's,
delight.
it makes Fridays basically like a throwaway day. They shouldn't be, but sometimes half days are such garbage.
Yeah,
Because
they are.
yeah. So like there's a Summer Friday episode where like they go to this like rooftop snazzy pool party thing and they're all drinking fancy cocktails. And I was like, entry level publishing professionals in New York City do not have the like time and resources to do this. Like what are you? And it
Yeah.
totally like my publishing friends and I would watch it and we'd be like, okay, we're gonna have to just like pretend we don't work in publishing because this is just not how it
Oh,
works.
for sure. And I imagine that, like, I think about that all the time. So when I answered that question on Reddit, there were two categories that I was like, I will not read books about cowboys and ranchers slash farmers, any of that. Not going to
Yeah.
do it. Yellowstone has ruined it for all of us. Um, and authors, because I feel like
Yeah.
there's so many writers in the world who use authors as main characters, and they perpetuate this myth that you publish a single book and it's lightning striking and suddenly you're in the world of gigantic advances and this
Oh man.
super supportive vast publishing team that is willing to wait for whenever you have fixed your writer's block to get the next
Yes.
book to, like, I'm
No.
like, no, I
Mm-mm.
cannot. And
Yep.
I think about that too. I'm like, how many medical professionals watch Grey's
Oh man.
Anatomy or ER or any of those and are like, it's not how any of that works. Or
Yeah.
the plethora of law enforcement television, like
Uh-huh.
not a single law enforcement person I know is like, that's totally accurate.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Oh.
Yeah.
And like, oh, we could go on forever.
Yeah.
The long-term impact of the CSI effect on our actual legal system is an issue. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
people walk into courtrooms as a jury member expecting all of this hard evidence.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh my gosh.
it's ridiculous.
I was on a jury and one of the guys, like we everyone had decided uh the verdict would go one way except for this one guy.
Oh no.
And we were like, okay, what's your hold up, buddy? And he was like, I just feel like he's hiding something. And
Oh.
I'm not going to get into the specifics of what I was on a jury for, but it was not a violent crime. It wasn't, it was very cut and dry. Like there were some pieces where it's like, yeah, I wish I had evidence to like let me know what happened here, but ultimately, given what I have, the decision is pretty obvious.
Yeah.
I feel like he's hiding something. We were like, that's not how this works, my guy. Like,
Let's talk about the definition of reasonable doubt, shall we?
yeah.
Which is like an illustration on a much lighter level of what the value of a sensitivity read is. Like, imagine if
Exactly.
all of those police procedurals were accurate, and
Yeah.
imagine the benefit to our judicial system.
Right. And I mean, think about if you read a book from a demographic that is underrepresented in media, whatever that might be, when someone does it right, you're like, oh,
Thank
yes,
you.
this is it. Like the movie Bridesmaids was one of the first new
Oh,
movies I remember seeing that really portrayed female friendships in a way that I resonated with. The two, Maya Rudolph's character and Kristen Wiig's character, like when I saw it with my best friend and our husbands, and when we walked out, her husband was like, do you guys get like royalties for this movie? Or because it felt so much like, yes, you finally represented female friendships in a way that like vibes with me.
right.
um
Yep.
and it makes that book, that's why that movie has such the reputation that it does, because there were so many women that were like, yes, that's how we are,
Finally.
and that's what a sensitivity reader wants to give you, is the
Right.
opportunity to capture those stories in a way. I mean, I think if you've never read like I'm trying to think where this has been. It's it had a big life on Tumblr, and I don't even know if Tumblr's really a thing anymore.
Oh, man.
Certainly not what it used to be.
Lives
Um,
with Twitter these days.
ugh, RIP. Um, but there used to be these compilations of men writing women,
Yes.
and the
Oh, those were my
things,
favorite.
yes, it's so, the things that they write that they think women think or do or feel, like physically feel, and it's like, what? Have you met a woman?
Yeah.
Like,
Ever? Have you talked to one? Like,
right. Yeah. So like that, a sensitivity is trying to save you from being featured on a list like that,
yes.
in
Yeah.
whatever demographic you are representing.
Yeah.
They're not trying to ruin your nice time. They're trying to help you write in an educated fashion. Um, I think
Oh, that
people can,
everyone would be
yeah,
educated.
I think people can just balk at when people say like that phrase that you said, or the way that you've portrayed that's harmful. um I think people really struggle with hearing that, because when it's uncomfortable to hear, but also there is um a sentiment of like, people are too soft, people are too sensitive, like, and well, I
Yeah.
personally would hardly disagree with that, because I think words have a lot of power. It's not just that, it's not just that you said a word or phrase that is hurtful, it's also just, if you're going to portray a woman, you should make her act like a real woman. If you're going to portray a Jewish person, you should make sure that they know what it's, like, if you're going to
Right.
portray this group, make sure that you portray them and not your idea of what
Caricature
that,
of
yeah.
what they are, because that's your
Yeah.
only exposure to them.
Yeah.
It makes me think of that movie from a while ago with Jack Nicholson, who is himself perhaps a bit problematic. As Good as It Gets. Do you remember that?
No,
He's
I
a
don't.
man who writes fiction,
Oh, okay.
and there's a point where he goes into his publisher's office, and the administrative assistant or whoever at the desk, the receptionist, is like,
Yeah.
I love your books. You write women so well. How do you do that? And he's like, I think of a man and I take away all reason and accountability.
Gosh.
I'm like, that's kind of meta right there, but I love
Yeah.
it. It's accurate.
Yeah. Oh
Oh,
man.
like, oh, let's not do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, I feel like we've covered some good ground here. We
Yeah,
are
for sure.
always open to feedback, to questions, to
Yeah.
alternate opinions, as long as they're nice, because
Yeah.
I am a little soft and tender, and if you use mean words with me, that's not true. I'll probably just laugh. But yeah, it would seriously, like,
Yeah.
let's have the conversation, and let's we're always here for that. We can always learn more.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you're a sensitivity reader, let us know. We would love to
Yeah.
kind of start building a list and have resources for people, because that is important. Knowing, like,
Absolutely.
just having the tools at your disposal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think that's, do you feel like we covered it all, Kendall?
I mean, everything. We said everything,
We've
everything
solved
there
the
is to
problems of
say.
the world. Gosh, if only everybody would just listen.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it. And we will be around again with more
Mhm.
conversations. We're just trying to get in the habit of having regular conversations about things we think authors, especially self-publishing authors, might care
Yeah,
about. So,
absolutely. If you have any things you want to hear us talk about, reach out to us on any of our socials, shoot us an email,
yeah,
you know.
for sure. For
Yeah.
sure. Socials, self-publishing services, at self-publishing services. We are active on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. Not so much Twitter.
No.
If you want to email us, the best email address is sps@selfpublishingservices.com. And we're here to have the conversation.
Yep.
All right, guys, we will catch you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.